So let's have Jessica on stage. Please take away.
Thank you so much. So yes, my name is Jessica Talisman, and my topic this year, I will tell you, it actually summarizes my journey starting in the 1990s.
Yeah.
1990s, not to age myself, but I come from a library science background. And was fortunate enough to be exposed and introduced to the semantic web as part of my work, my master's work. But I started way back when building the largest visual history catalog in the world with the Steven Spielberg Foundation, the Shoah Foundation for Visual History. And it created a really dynamic search environment. It still exists today, where you can look up 3 to 6 minute video clips having to do with almost any topic you can imagine related to World War II. So that was the beginning in the late 90s. And just the evolution from there, I worked for companies like Amazon, Adobe, Overstock, Department of Justice, lots of different information and knowledge environments, but I've also worked as an academic librarian. So it's a really interesting juxtaposition, because ultimately the common theme is it has to do with knowledge management. And it's something that I write about quite a bit I have a Substack and in my own work. And while we're talking about LLMs and we're talking about AI, and it's really seductive, the idea of knowledge graphs and ontologies, and it's created quite a buzz. The actual work, the actual underlying work, is largely not supported or funded in organizations. I've experienced that personally, firsthand. And then I've also, just being in large organizations and witnessed it and felt it myself. But then also I'm looking at the larger landscape. And while everyone is really motivated by data-centric approaches, knowledge involves something a little bit different. It's sustained knowledge management, things like provenance, and structuring using ontologies, really under knowledge elicitation frameworks. That's really where my research and work has now evolved to center around maintaining reliable information and knowledge systems to support reliability and to try to also combat misinformation and disinformation, which tends to rear its ugly head when we have less reliable, less structured, less semantic, and overusing the term semantic, but less hardened or reliable systems for knowledge. And so the investment and where I see this sort of coming to fruition is that largely the industry is continuing to sort of pursue this data-centric approach and not really investing in what it takes to organize and to structure knowledge. And that's the real work that underlies is the underpinning of ontologies and semantics and context. So when we talk about these things abstractly, it again is very seductive, but how do we get there? And again, we need organizational investment, leadership support, and understanding what ontologies are in fact doing. So that's largely the what behind where and how I arrived at my topic. So the idea of betting on futures is that, we have yet to see many really, I know that Giuseppe's, had success and he's architecting systems where they're built and they're structured for, to support knowledge. But if you look largely at a lot of organizations, what it takes to invoke, to elicit knowledge, there's, it also, the shape of the work is a little bit different than our normal sort of agile sprints and scrums and workflows. It's not fast necessarily, and it's not something that you can cram into like a 2-week sprint. It really does take a different shape and a different approach.
Amazing.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, and I think that you, Jessica, touched a really important point, right, about the reliability of systems, right, from an organizational perspective, because as you all we know, probably LLMs open new opportunities, right, in terms of extracting information from unstructured content, right, and start to build your own knowledge graph in some way, but you need the expertise and the experience. You have to face all the issues and all the situation, because it's not just a matter of building a graph in one shot. It's a matter of maintaining this graph over the time. And I think that Jessica and all her work is provide a huge contribution in this sense. So that's amazing.
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, it's not easy. It is something, you know, I have with Tony Seal, myself, and Katerina Kari, we created the Knowledge Graph Academy, and we've already graduated 23 students. But part of that work and the education piece is instrumental here. Is absolutely instrumental, because there is this misunderstanding that you build it once and you set it and it's done to that point. Like that ontology work is kind of like, we'll just get it into this shape and call it done. Or there's another sort of misunderstanding about the knowledge space where it's static. It's not dynamic, but in fact, knowledge systems are quite dynamic. Knowledge does not live in isolation. It's one of the problems with silos. And so, right. And so how do we get here? And to Giuseppe's point, it's something that just like you maintain databases and you have data engineers and data scientists, and it's constant refinement and additions and scaling and all of those factors that go into maintaining databases. It's not much different. The same requirements apply to knowledge.
So true. So he asked, like, most of the knowledge graph examples and use cases I see assume a centralized data source. I'm working on a data standard, OWL ontology, for impact reports in context of philanthropy and social finance. Many users, many data silos. Do you have examples you've seen of a successful federated distributed model of a knowledge graph where data is more shifting, diverse, dynamic, and there isn't one single master graph?
Oh,
That's a great question.
It's a great question. It's a big question. And you would have to reach back into the founding principles of the semantic web, I think, to find some of the original examples of that, where you have these linked data infrastructures that leverage ontologies for federated systems that are distributed. And that exists at scale. Library systems are exactly that manifestation, where you have these distributed ontology-driven systems that are able to connect through. An example would be VIAF, if you want to check that out, which is the virtual international authority file system that connects all the world's libraries and repositories and Wikidata through linked data structures and SCOS, RDF, OWL type structures. And that's federated, and federated graphs in that sort of context, and especially like if you go to VIF, you'll see that its coverage extends to corporate entities, subject headings. It reaches into every single national library or country's library in the world. And that, if you look at Wikidata, that's also part of the underlying logic there. Now that's ginormous, but if you were to bring that into like a social context, in fact, what you're talking about, Garth, is something that I built for an NGO called Shock the System. And that's a social organization that has launched about a year and a half ago in Vermont, and is connecting communities, volunteer organizations, nonprofits through that ecosystem. And their plan is to hopefully at some point extend beyond Vermont. But that is a distributed networked system in that same vein.
That's amazing, Jessica. I just felt that, like you just like won like cloud on this.
Yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't, I mean, what's so cool is like you build it, Garth, and then like there's all these other organizations, whether you realize it or not, that are doing the same thing, and then you're set up for interoperability should you choose to extend the network, which is something that is just absolutely amazing about ontologies and knowledge graphs.
Great. I see Garth smiling, like he's like really happy with the answer.
I hope so.
We have one more question from Dav. What is an example of a knowledge elicitation framework?
Okay, so and actually, I don't know, Giuseppe, if you're familiar with Sephora out of Milan. It's like a knowledge.
Oh,
Yeah,
no, I didn't heard it. But
they're really interesting. It's a nonprofit organization. They received. So I wrote a piece, Deb, on it was a 4-part series called Process Knowledge Management that I have on Substack. But I collaborated for part of it with the Sephora group, and it was all about eliciting tacit knowledge. And part of the framework in that series, I completely opened up this exposed and wrote about Sephora's work with Siemens, Bosch, a bunch of other industrial systems, and they came up with and developed the procedural knowledge ontology, or PKO. Their GitHub is open. They have an audit framework, but they also have a knowledge elicitation framework that's really simple but elegant. And part of their research and work that was funded, a 3-year grant from the EU with partnership from enterprise, some industrial enterprise customers, they developed this process for eliciting tacit knowledge and encoding procedural knowledge, which sort of morphed into, there's a longer backstory behind it, but it follows the same logic as what's been presented as context graphs. However, it actually has a methodology for eliciting tacit knowledge. That's the difference. It's in their GitHub. You can look up PKO, Procedural Knowledge Ontology, Sephora Group, and you can also check out my Substack where I discuss that, but it's pretty awesome. Awesome framework.
That sounds really cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
That is amazing. Jessica, I cannot wait for your in-person session for this year's KGC.
Well, I just saw like Garth is in Canada, and actually there's the, you can look at the, gosh, it's like there's a music, or performing arts. Canada, the Canadian government funded this huge project, and there's a knowledge graph to support performing artists and events, and leverages mostly SCOS and schema.org, but it's an open endpoint knowledge graph that helps to support smaller organizations, arts institutions, to promote their events online. So you might want to check that out, because that's a distributed federated system.
That is amazing. That is amazing. So I have one last question for you, Jessica, from my end. Like Dan, for the practitioners in the room today, what's the one thing they should stop doing this week?
Stop doing?
Yeah, stop doing.
Oh gosh. I mean, if I would say, instead of just trusting wholesale what an LLM produces, or creating these complex mappings, I'll give you an example. Something that I'm seeing quite a bit is a really simple thing is, rather than just shooting your prompts through an LLM, the one thing I really recommend is start creating your own prompt libraries. And especially important in organizations, it can help knowledge management quite a bit if we can track prompts and see where there's overlap and where we might be introducing bias, but also start to consolidate prompts within an environment. That can be really useful for knowledge graph engineers as well, to see what prompts people are pushing through LLMs. That can serve as a foundation also for knowledge graph engineering and development of competency questions.
That was amazing. That was an amazing answer. Yeah, I can edit this really well. Okay. Okay. One last question from Sanjay, and then we really have to go to Giuseppe. Are there any widely adopted industry specific ontologies that are being used by multiple companies in a given industry?
That's a tough one, because there's open standard ontologies. I mean, I would say this is a perfect transition for Giuseppe, probably, because in the medical space and healthcare space, there's more development in that area of some unified ontologies that are widely used within an industry. So like the gene ontology would be one example, SNOMED, which is more of a vocabulary, but some of those medical ontologies, there's a really vibrant community, lots of contributions, lots of standardization and cross-pollination. So I would say, just look at the, FIBO is another one in finance. There's certain regulated industries where you'll find these largely implemented ontologies that cross environments, but are relative to a domain or industry.
Okay, thank you.
Great. All right. Now then, let's wrap up Jessica's amazing session. Thank you, Jessica, again for telling us amazing stories about how you picked the topic. We are now more than excited to see you in person in New York. Now I will bring Giuseppe to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Hey.
Lynn, for this invitation, and thank you so much for the kind introduction. Well, let's start from my path, I would say. I started to work with knowledge graphs quite early, right? I would say in 2010, right? Because during my master thesis, I tried to develop an ontology-based visualization systems, and it used the Flash. I don't know if there is anyone that already remember the Flash technologies, right? That was very famous on the web and for creating animations and so on. So this was the technology, right, that I used for developing this visualization system. And during the years, I mean, the linked data community was very productive. I remember that in 26, Tim Berners-Lee released the linked data issues, right, that provide the basic rules to publish your data on the web and link such data with the other data sets in a federated manner, as Jessica mentioned. So for me, it was amazing, right, discovering this topic that years. So I wanted to provide my contribution. And after that, I left for a while the technological world, right, because I started to become a communication and journalist guy. So I worked in the communication for many years, for many newspapers here in Italy. But then I decided to come back to the knowledge graph world. So in 2016, I started a PhD on the topic. My PhD focus was related to the automatic building of knowledge graphs, but in that period without LLMs, right? So if I had to do it today, right, maybe I would approach this problem in a very different way. But I mean, in 2016, the bunch of technologies that you had for this automatize this process was not so big. And then I worked for different companies. Some of graph-driven companies like GraphAware, which is a company that basically developed its own tool, right, for building and analyzing knowledge graphs. And right now I work for CSI Piemonte, which does not stand for crimes investigation, right? It stands for Consortium for Information System. And basically it's a company, in Italy we call it in-house company, right? So basically it serves public administrations in the Northwest, right? And this is a traditional company because it basically leverages legacy technologies, right? So I think that one of my main goals is try to introduce and some way evangelize, right? People with graph technologies.
Mm-hmm.
And during this conference, as you mentioned, Min, I will start with the masterclass maybe it's the first masterclass of Monday, right? While the technical talk, it's the last one on Thursday. So I will cover the full conference. And well, I decided to focus for the masterclass on the healthcare domain because I think there is a twofold characteristics, right, of this specific domain. One, it's technological one, because when you work with sensible data, you cannot send, for instance, information to cloud services like, I don't know, Cloud, OpenAI, and so on. You have to focus on using open LLMs deployed on your own system. And on the other hand, you have to respect the privacy of the customers and the patients. So, for instance, one of the problems that we encounter is that we cannot move the data around, right? We have just to live on the legacy database and then try to access directly in the data in the concrete database. And the other side, it's related to the data and modeling this data, because as Jessica mentioned, probably healthcare is one of the richest ontology domain, right? I mean, you have a lot of different ontologies that basically go in different depth on the domain of knowledge, and they are specialized. For instance, there is the gene ontology that is focused on the gene information. There is the SNOMED that is a vocabulary for clinical processes. There are other ontologies like the human phenotype ontologies, which basically map some symptoms to rare diseases. And during the masterclass, I will try to show you how you can combine all these ontologies with unstructured content, and then try to guide and to drive an agent using this rich knowledge, right? So I will try to show you that having these ontologies, you can reconstruct an explainable path on how the agent reached the answer, because the medical one, it's the medical domain, it's a sensible domain. So having a black box that just answers to your questions, maybe it's not the right or the most, let me say, suitable path, right, to receive the answers. And I will show you how you can leverage the knowledge incorporated in these ontologies to provide explainable answers, right? And there is another point in this masterclass that is more related to a different perspectives on graphs that is called the graph neural networks. And in that sense, the key idea is that we usually treat the embeddings in a flat way, right? We can understand that we can just pass, for instance, a sentence as an input, and this sentence is transformed into an embedding representation. And graph neural networks had a different layer, right? Because leveraging the connection between the nodes, you can basically enrich your flat embedding with the relational structure. So I will show you how this basically relational representation can contribute to improve the systems at all.
Amazing.
So, yeah, hopefully so. Let's see.
Which is so important. I mean, that's something that we're seeing, and where the real opportunity is, I think it will unmask a lot, is that connection between relational database or traditional data systems and figuring out how to build those bridges. So I'm really excited to hopefully take your workshop.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, I will show you how you can access to these legacy databases in a virtual way, right? So the key idea is that you have the ontology within the graph. You have, for instance, the traditional database like Postgres, right? So traditional database, and then you merge the data when you need, right? In this way, you can guarantee, for instance, not moving the data of the patients around, not materialized directly in the graph, but just retrieve such data when you need, right? When you have to ask something that involves patient data.
Definitely.
Yeah. That's an important point. And the other presentation is a technical talk, right? And basically, I think it could be considered as a good practice to integrate graph technologies into traditional systems and processes, right? Because I think that one of the key points that we have to push is try to show and demonstrate how graph technologies, and particular knowledge graphs, can bring value, right, to also existing systems. And the key idea of this technical talk is how we modified a traditional pipeline for building chatbots, right? I mean, the CSI Piemonte has this chatbot that basically answers to many public information published from different public administrations. And among such information, there is some specific calendars or events that in many cases changed over the time, right? So if you use a traditional system, a traditional RAG systems, basically you are not able to monitor and define contradictions, supersedes, or stuff like that. So in that case, if you load anything in a traditional vector database, the chatbot starts to hallucinate, right? Because it has contradictory information, so it doesn't have the notion of sequence of the temporal dimension, right? So the idea was, okay, let's try to improve that part. And let's use a graph database in which we model the different events and sessions using nodes and try to build some causal or basically next event relationships, right? In this way, we are able to instruct the LLM to follow a well-structured paths, right? So the final status of the event, it's not decided by the LLM in a random manner, right? So basically it does not provide, because it always provides different answers when you perform the same question. That's one of the problems. So when you model such data using a graph, right? Basically the LLMs is able to understand the sequence and then, define the final status of an event in a deterministic way. So this is, I think, a good experiment, right, in putting a knowledge graph in production in a traditional process, in a traditional pipeline, right? Because obviously, organization, the CSI basically was born in 1977, right? So many years ago, for a company at least, and so they developed their own way, right, to face this stuff. But then they want to explore something new. And what I learned is that you have to demonstrate the value, right? So you have to face the problems that they already have and try to provide a contribution and try to show how building a knowledge graph also for a specific problem, a specific situation can change the rules, right? So I think that this could be considered a way to integrate knowledge graph technologies in traditional business approaches.
That's a great approach and perspective. Thank you for sharing all this. Do you have anything more to share, or do you think we can just move on to the question part?
Yeah, I think we can move on. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Very looking forward to all the talks you'll be giving in New York. And meanwhile, Garth, thank you for all these amazing questions. So he has one more question, maybe a niche question, but do you make use of RML or R2RML to map from relational tabular sources to ontologies?
Yeah, on my side, I used it in the past, right? Because during my PhD, as I mentioned before, my main goal was building knowledge graphs in an automatic way. And so the tool for performing this building included RML. So I have a bunch of structured sources, and then I try to basically generate with not LLMs, but other techniques, RML, right, in order to create this map between structured data sources and the ontology that was the skeleton of the knowledge graph. So I think I used it in the past, but I think that there are very good, interesting opportunities in using nowadays, right? Because when you are able to also generate, use it with the LLMs, these RML components, right? Maybe you have a tool for perform this mapping. And more importantly, you have a deterministic tool, right? Because you can use these RML, you can extend it if you need it, but from a certain point, you can use this deterministic artifact, right, to perform this mapping.
Great. Also, like a lot of our community members, they always want to learn more about like real use cases. And I think a lot of, members always have like not trouble, but like really want to learn practical use cases, and especially talking to non-tech people about all these ontology and knowledge graph. So especially you mentioned the healthcare field. What's the hardest part of this system to explain to a non-technical healthcare stakeholders?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that many of the problems or the issues that you encounter in healthcare, basically you encounter in other domains, right? Because there are
Exactly.
many cases in which you have maybe a bunch of knowledge defined by ontologies, but then you have private data, right? And want to build something useful on top of this private data using the knowledge incorporated within ontologies. So I will try to share some experience on it. So basically, if you have data, I don't know, another examples could be law and regulations, right? So in that case, you can, for instance, model law and regulations as a knowledge graph, and there are a lot of ontologies, right, that can support you in this modeling part, and then you can try to connect this legal knowledge with your data, right? With data related to people that should be kept private, right? This is something that could be done using the same approach, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's so interesting because healthcare, because it is a little bit more mature in terms of ontologies and development along this line. There's so much to learn from healthcare that we can adopt and adapt into other domains. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, definitely, because it's a complex domain, and ontology engineers had to think a lot, right, to define the right way. And I mean, it's also sensible knowledge, right? Because you cannot, I mean, you have to think about the entities, the relationships, the taxonomies, the nature of the relationship between the entities. So I think that there is a lot of experience in this field that can be, as mentioned by Jessica, leveraged in other domains, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Giuseppe, for your amazing talk, and very excited for your workshops and the technical talk for this May in New York. Looking forward to meet you in person in New York. And yeah, I think we are coming up on time. I want to be really respectful for everyone's afternoon. Huge thank you to Jessica and Giuseppe. Generally one of the best sessions we've had so far, even though this is only the third AMA session we're having. And a few things before we drop off. Yeah, so thank you for joining, guys. And so KGC 2026 is May 4th to 8th in New York, so please mark it. And we are doing more of these AMA sessions to the conference. So next one is also coming up. Keep an eye on Slack and Luma. And if you haven't joined the Slack yet, please, join the Slack, and let's keep the real conversation go there. Thanks, everyone. See you at the community and in New York in person.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one, guys.
Thank you.